At 3 o'clock in the morning, in the high-level apartment in the downtown area of New Asia Trantis, Ethan Cole suddenly sat up from the bed, slid across the extreme angle with cold sweat, and his chest felt like he was being pressed by a heavy object. He just ran away from a nightmare, and his ears were still filled with a low echo, "You can't escape." The neon light outside the window was dazzlingly flashing, and the low-frequency buzzing of the unmanned patrol was like the city's fighting, never stopping. He rubbed his son's hole and tried to swing the pressure off the picture, and found that the air in the room was extremely heavy. The data on the bed suddenly lit up, and an anonymous message popped up on the screen, the words cold as ice, "Tonight will be your last night." Ethan was stunned for a moment, and a low voice curse, "Which boring hacker is it?" He reached out to try to turn off the screen, but he didn't touch the button at his fingertips, and the lights in the entire room were turned off. The intelligent system emits a harsh noise, and then it is silent. The darkness made him breathless. "What are you doing?" Ethan muttered, groping out of bed, stepping on the cold floor. He walked to the control panel and took a few shots, without any reaction. The neon light outside the window illuminates the room, and the scattered notes and old parts make people suffocate. He glanced at the end of the data, and the message was still there, as if he was helpless and laughing at him. The screen flashed and a short title of an unread email appeared, "Quantum Band Enhancement Project, Final Warning." He wanted to open his eyebrows, but suddenly a low mechanical failure sound came from the room, interrupting his movements. The heartbeat accelerated and Ethan felt uneasy. He grabbed the light source on the table, illuminating the surrounding area, and found that the locks in the room were slowly moving, not his operation. He held his breath, took a step back, and said in a low voice, "Cold, Ethan, this is just a system failure, it must be a failure, right?" But the uneasiness pierced him like a knife, and he knew that this place was never safe. The door lock finally stuck and stopped halfway. Ethan bit his teeth, grabbed an old wrench, quickly pulled to the door, and suddenly opened the emergency exit of the escape passage. The narrow passage was damp and cold, and the broken advertising screen on the wall was flashing continuously, playing the eternal life technology phrase, "Beyond death, embrace eternity." He was not attentive, and rushed down in a hurry, with the soles of his shoes rushing back on the metal ladder. When turning around a corner, a figure suddenly appeared in the entrance. The other party was wearing a pure white mask and a black warrior equipment, standing in the dim light, like a statue without life. Ethan stopped suddenly, his throat tightened, and his hand holding the wrench shook slightly. "Who are you?" He tried to make the sound harder, "Why follow me?" The other party did not answer, but just raised his hand slowly, and the high-frequency vibrating dagger emitted a deadly buzz, with a pace that was so light that it seemed that he had already calculated every step of his. Ethan just shouted, "Why do you want to kill me?" The other party was approaching like a shadow, and the cold blade pierced his chest without warning, and the pain instantly swallowed him. He fell to the ground, his eyes gradually blurred, and the noise of the city around his ears magnified like a ridicule. At 6 o'clock in the morning, the sun shone through the broken window into the room, and Ethan suddenly sat up from the bed, gasping for breath. The pierced trauma was still left in his chest, and his memory was as clear as a blade. He was clearly dead, and in that escape passage, he was killed by the white-masked man. But now, he was lying on the bed with no injuries, the room was back to normal, and the indicator lights of the intelligent system were flat and quiet. "I'm obviously dead," he said in a low voice, his fingers pressing his chest unconsciously, trying to confirm whether the pain was true. "Why am I still here?" He looked around, everything was exactly the same as last night, and even the notes on the table remained distant. His brain flashed past his death last night, as clear as if it had just happened, but his body was insufficiency. What's going on? Fantasy? Or a repetition of a certain time? He couldn't believe it, but he couldn't deny it. The data end lights up again, this time it is a new message, signed Shadow. The text on the screen was cold and direct, "I know your secret, Cole. If you want to live, reply to me." Ethan stared at the sentence, his heart beat like a buzzing bird with no humans, so rapid that it was almost out of control. He didn't know who the Shadow was, nor did he know if this was another trap. But last night's death was too real, and that feeling of powerlessness swept him like a chain. He hesitated for a moment, his fingers resting above the keyboard. Fast analysis in the brain: this may be a trap, replying or maybe putting yourself in deeper danger, but if you don't catch this straw, the white mask will come again. He doesn't have any choice. Finally, he gritted his teeth and pressed the reply button. "Who are you?" As he entered the sentence, his fingers trembled slightly. "What do you know?" The light on the screen flashed and slammed, as if something was counting. The neon lights outside the window were still cold, waiting for his decision. After a few hours, Ethan Cole was still sitting in front of the end of the data, his fingers stopped on the keyboard, and his brain repeatedly replayed the scene of last night's death and the cold message. The morning sun shines in dazzlingly from the gaps in the old leaf window, shining on his white face, without any warmth. He looked down at his hand, turned over and checked. His skin was smooth and flawless, as if the high-frequency vibration dagger had never pierced his chest. "I'm obviously dead," he murmured in a low voice. The sound was empty in the quiet apartment. Outside the window, the noise of the city is coming, and occasionally the strangeness of the unmanned engine is reminded of the indifference of the world. There was a scent of old in the room, making people feel wailed. He stood up, walked to the window, pulled open a corner of the window, and squinted his eyes to look out, but the light only made him feel even more uneasy. Before returning to the end, his fingers were above the keyboard, and his mind flew in his brain. If this is not illusion, what was the death of last night? Why can I sit here? He glanced at the scattered notes on the table, and the message he received last night: Quantum Insulation Project. The final warning was like a thorn tilted in the brain. He gritted his teeth and entered the keyword to start searching. Only a pile of unrelated advertising spam popped up on the screen. Then he flashed an old news title: The Laboratory of Immoral Technology exploded, and the core data was lost. Before he could take a closer look, the interface was forced to cut, showing a cold interview restriction. It's another investigation that should be killed. Ethan lowered his curse, his hands clenched into fists. He closed his eyes and tried to figure out his head. Public data was blocked to show that this was not a simple hacker malicious act, and someone, or some force, don't want him to know the truth. A chill came up from behind, making him feel numb, but he immediately opened his eyes, and there was a stubbornness in his eyes. "I can't sit and wait for death anymore. If I come again, I'm not sure I'll wake up." At this moment, a light sound came from the end of the data, the screen lighted up, and a new message jumped out. The signature is still Shadow, the text is short and cold. "Do you think you can escape this game?" Ethan stared at the sentence, his throat tightened, his fingers stopped on the keyboard, and hesitated for a moment. The blue light on the screen reflected on his face, and the interference signal was constantly stumbled, making the air even more stressful. "Game," he said to himself, with anger in his voice, "are you saying that the white mask killed me last night just a kind of entertainment?" The soundless figure flashed through his brain, the deadly blade. He forced himself to calm down and analyze the other party's words. If this is a game, there must be rules, players, and behind-the-scenes masterminds. He can no longer be beaten. He knocked his finger and replied, "If this is a game, I'll find the rules." He pressed the sending key, his heartbeat as fast as a mechanical noise around his ears. The screen lights are flashing and swaying, as if something is counting. A few seconds later, the Shadow's message appeared again: "Very good, Cole. You're a little bit more skewed than I thought. But the rules are not something you can touch easily. You're in the dark network competition venue, every death is priced, and the audience is waiting to bet on your next end." Ethan's pupils narrowed slightly. "Dark internet competition field?" He repeated his voice in a low voice, quickly scrambling the wires in his brain. He heard that it was an underground world that even the Ministry of Law could not touch, full of illegal transactions and distorted entertainment. If Shadow says it is true, his death is not an accident, but a certain live performance? Thinking of countless eyes experiencing themselves in the dark, his stomach swelled. "Show me the certificate." He quickly entered, his fingers trembling slightly. "Or what do I believe you?" The screen was silent for a moment, Then an encrypted link popped up, followed by a sentence. Click it and you will see the truth. But be careful, Cole, once you step in, you will never go back. Ethan stared at the codes, and it seemed like there were two forces pulling in his heart. Reason told him that this might be a trap, or even another trick of the white mask. Instinct drove him to grasp the only straw. He knew that if he didn't keep track of it, the next death might be the last one. I'm not a warrior, but I'm at least a scientist, he said in a low voice. If this is some kind of experiment, I must find the variable. The sunlight outside the window was covered by clouds, the room was dim, and the mechanical aberration seemed to be a little more harsh. Ethan took a deep breath and tried to calm his heartbeat. He simulated various possibilities in his brain. By clicking the link, he might expose his location, or download a certain virus, but if he didn't, he would never know whether the shadow was saying true or false, nor could he dig out the white mask. If this was a chess game, I wouldn't be a chess piece anymore, he said in a low voice, with a desperate sound. When my fingertips touched the touch control panel, I clicked the link. The screen flashed, and the interference signal became more and more urgent, like in a low voice, which he hadn't yet understood. Ethan's eyes were locked tightly on the end, his palms were sweating slightly, waiting for the unknown to arrive. Just as Ethan Cole clicked the encrypted link, his heart beat sharply, and he was still stumbled into his brain whether he had made a stupid decision. The screen at the end of the data suddenly turned black. Then, a red virtual interface flashed, and the low electronic sounds on the ears made the brain buzz. He blinked, his mind as if he was being pulled out of the dark space of the apartment and swept into a cold digital purity. In front of me is a broken city of esports, with neon lights and shadows in the broken high floors, and low noises are diamonds like birds. The air around seemed to become sticky, making the chest feel breathless. Ethan took a deep breath and tried to calm himself down. The broken concrete under the feet hurts, and the sound from the distance is biting cold. Is this virtual space? How could it be so real? Where is the exit? He gritted his teeth and glanced over the empty streets, but his heartbeat accelerated uncontrollably. Suddenly, a slight quiet sound of noise echoed from the ears. He turned around suddenly, only seeing the strange light and shadow on the ground, and there was nothing. The sound of his footsteps was particularly harsh in the silence. He subconsciously retreated and felt an invisible pressure approaching from behind, like a knife sticking his spine. Without reaction, a cold light flashed through it, and the chest was painful, and the vision was quickly blurred. In the last moment, he only caught a faint wave in the air. That thing, was it invisible? As the moment the consciousness broke, Ethan suddenly opened his eyes and realized that he had returned to the apartment. The pain in his head teared his nerves like a thorn. He gasped heavily and sweated heavily. The room was still so dark, and the blue light at the end of the data reflected on his white face. He looked down at his chest, with no scars, but the pain just now seemed to be engraved in the sea of brain. Back, he muttered in a low voice, his voice almost unsatisfied. Invisible technology? It's impossible, why can't I even notice any action? Without breathing, the screen flashed again, and the red interface appeared again, and the low noise pulled him back to the ruins like a chain. This time, he didn't even think. A sharp electronic horn pierced into the eardrum, and the body was numb and limbs seemed to be killed in place. In the corner of the field, a blurred figure approached, and the device in his hand emitted a faint light. The neon lights around him suddenly flashed out of control, as if they were being disturbed. The current-like pain spread throughout the body, and the mind fell into darkness again. When he returned to the apartment, Ethan almost fell on the carpet, and his head hurt was even more intense than last time, like someone smashed his son in the hole with a jerk. He gritted his teeth and climbed up, holding his hand on the table. As he glanced over the table, he suddenly glanced at a strange thing, a miniature data chip with the words Aderna Technology engraved on the surface. He stared at the small words, and it seemed that he had heard the name somewhere. His head hurt again, so he had to go in and out of the twitch. What's this? He lowered his spell and couldn't think carefully. When the screen lights up for the third time, Ethan was pulled back to the competition venue with a burst of anger. He appeared in a narrow alleyway, with neon lights flashing and low noise that made people feel excited. He no longer felt hesitant and ran away, with only one thought in his mind: live. After passing through the corner of the alley, I was about to reach a half-open iron door, and a sudden voice came from behind. The speed was unbelievably fast. In the blink of an eye, the figure was in front of him, and a cold light reflected in the sharp weapon in his hand. The neck slammed, and the consciousness broke again. After his rebirth, Ethan sat in the apartment chair, gasping for a heavy silence. The blue light on the screen reflected his tired face, and his eyes were filled with blood. 3 deaths, 3 methods, each time without any strength. He clenched his fists, his fingers turned white, and his brain was analyzed. The first time was a tangible tracking, the second time was an electromagnetic interference, this time was speed. This kind of power cannot be possessed by humans naturally. Could it be a certain biological enhancement technique? Next time I will have to record more details. At this moment, he glanced at a detail in the tunnel memory. Beside the iron gate, there was an old end machine, and there seemed to be data flowing on the screen. He thought to himself, would that thing be a thread? If you can get close, you may find something. At the end, a light sound came out, and a new message jumped out. The signature is still Shadow, and the text is coldly written: "It's really bad, Cole. Don't always think about running and watching his actions. The techniques behind those abilities are not something you can guess at indiscriminately." Ethan stared at the sentence, his chest feeling like a fire was blocked. Are you helping me or watching me laugh? He gritted his teeth and knocked on this sentence, his fingers trembling slightly from anger. A few seconds later, the other party replied, I am just a sidekick, Cole. It depends on yourself to survive. Ethan snorted coldly, leaned back to the back of the chair, and his eyes closed the screen. This guy must know more than he said, but why don't he tell me directly? Are you trying to find me, or have other plans? He closed his eyes and tried to calm down. If the Watcher's ability is as I guess, then next time I have to change my strategy and can't escape blindly. Invisibility, interference, speed. There must be a break behind these characteristics, just find. The mechanical strangeness of the city outside the window was like a whisper of an unsolved equation. Ethan stopped his finger on the keyboard, and there was an unknown emotion in his eyes. After only a few minutes, Ethan's CORR had not yet passed away from his 3 deaths. His fingers shook on the desktop of the apartment, and the screen at the end of the data flashed again without any mercy. The low-frequency noise is like an invisible chain, which makes the skin numb, and the consciousness is instantly pulled out of reality and re-entered into the cold virtual space, the dark network competition field. Under the foot is a narrow ruined alley, with flashing neon lights casting strange lights and shadows. There seems to be countless detailed words lying around the ears in the air, making people's backs sway. Ethan bit his teeth and squatted behind a pile of broken metal bones, his eyes locked at the old terminal next to the remote iron gate. You can no longer just run around like before, you must get what you have to get. He took a deep breath, and the pain in his chest was pressed down on the wall and moved slowly. Every step was extremely light, his heartbeat almost over the low bird in the alleyway, ready to rake in the dark at any time. Finally approaching the iron gate, the end machine screen was filled with a faint green light, and the data flow continued to roll, like in a low voice, which was an unsolved secret. Ethan quickly crouched down, tapping his fingers quickly, trying to download any useful information in the picture. As the screen flashed, a blurred image jumped out, a figure, and a strange symbol was engraved on the surface of the weapon in his hand, like the combination of the letter A and the infinite symbol. He had a brow and flashed his head and said the words on the chip in the drawer, Aderna Technology. This is absolutely no coincidence. Just as I was about to continue to search, the screen flashed through another screen, which was very short and almost like a mistake. It was a laboratory with a row of cold rolls in the background, one of which was labeled Failed Product 03. The tag pierced into the brain like current, his hands trembled unconsciously, and a vague memory fragment seemed to be touched and could not be grasped. He gritted his teeth and muttered in a low voice, "What kind of ghost thing is this?" The pain suddenly increased, like a current bleeding through his brain bag. His eyes went dark and he quickly closed the download and stored the data into the virtual interface. At this moment, a slight quiet sound came from behind me, and the sound around me seemed to be sucked away for a moment. He turned around suddenly, and the light and shadow deep in the alley twisted slightly. Watcher! Without thinking too much, he pushed his legs towards the shadow on the other side of the iron door, but the next second, his consciousness was cut off. When he returned to the apartment, Ethan suddenly popped up from his chair, and his head hurt made his eyes dark and his cold sweat flowed. The room was still so dark, and the blue light at the end of the data reflected on his white face. He gasped heavily, and after he calmed himself, he immediately adjusted the data that had just been downloaded. On the screen, that blurry image reappeared, the Watcher's weapon. The symbols were clearly visible, almost consistent with the Aderna Technology logo. When he enlarged the picture, he suddenly noticed a tiny mark on the symbol, like a mark left by a finger mark. This made him feel nervous. Isn't the Watchman completely useless? He clenched his fists and felt a sense of anxiety in his heart. Just escaping will only make yourself look like a trapped beast, waiting for the next time to be slaughtered. I have to fight back, even if there's only one chance. He hesitated, his fingers slamming on the keyboard, and his brain flashed through the cold reply of the shadow. Is this person helping me or using me? If I don't ask clearly, I may not even know how I die. He gritted his teeth and knocked on a message. You have known that Watchmen have something to do with Aderna technique, right? Don't complain to me again, tell me clearly. A few seconds later, the screen was lightly resounding, and the other party's reply jumped out. The data stream in your hand is like a string of undecrypted codes, which is more valuable than the guessing value in your brain. Don't waste time asking me and crack it yourself. Ethan sneered, his fingertips unconsciously retracted, almost smashing the keyboard. What exactly is this guy playing? Help me? Or just want to see me slap? He leaned back to the back of the chair, closed his eyes and tried to calm down. The shadow word is right. The data in the hand is indeed a thread, but this symbol, this technique. What is Aderna? If the Watcher's ability comes from some kind of experiment, will his weaknesses also be hidden in these details? He flew rapidly in his brain, and he recalled the scene of every death. The first is invisible tracking, the second is electromagnetic interference, and the third is speed. Are there any common points between these abilities? Invisibility and interference may depend on a certain energy field. If the source of interference can be found, it may be able to counter it. The speed is even more irritating unless it is mechanically enhanced, but the technical cost is less expensive unless Aderna supports it behind it. This cycle is like an unsolved equation, and I have to find the variables, even if it is just the slightest breakthrough. He opened his eyes quietly, his eyes falling on the image again. The symbol flashed like a slight slanting. He whispered, if this is really part of the experiment, then the Watchman is just a pawn. I have to find the manipulator. The city outside the window was low when he stared at the symbols on the screen, and his fingers stopped on the keyboard, as if waiting for an echo of an unanswered answer. The city outside the window was still low when the air in the middle of the night seemed to be trapped. Ethan's fingers stopped on the keyboard, staring at the picking symbol on the screen. Suddenly, a dazzling blue light flashed through, and the data finally emitted a low buzz, as if urging something. His eyebrows were snaking, his fingers were about to move, and an encrypted message jumped out. The words were as cold as ice, enter the deep space, now. It was a shadow again. Ethan bit his teeth tightly and his fingers quickly hit him, and his mind was instantly pulled into the depths of the dark network. After a blur before his eyes, he stood in a virtual hacker space, with data floating around him, the code wall squirming like a living creature, constantly skipping through broken advertising clips, and the low mechanical sound came from his feet, like a heartbeat, making people's chests swell. There seemed to be fine sounds on my ears, like someone was talking on private words behind me. He adjusted his virtual incarnation for a moment, his eyes locked in a vague black shadow ahead. The shadow was waiting there. You'd better have a reason to pull me into this ghost place. Ethan's voice was low, and with the uncontrollable fire, he walked forward 2 steps, and the data patterns under his feet opened slightly. The Warden's weapon symbol is almost the same as the Aderna Technology logo. You knew this a long time ago, right? Why not? The incarnation of the shadow was slightly slight, as if he was considering whether he should say one more sentence, but soon returned to calm, and his voice was as cold as a knife. Do you think I don't want to know the truth? Some codes, if unpacked, will only make you die faster. Ethan snorted coldly, his hands clenched into fists. Stop this. I've died 3 times, what else can I do? Tell me, what is Aderna? Shadow was silent for a moment and finally opened her mouth. I give you a tool, the code of the quantum interferer, which can shorten the energy field, or perhaps counter the observance obscurity and speed. But this thing is risky and may expose our position. Do you dare to use it? Ethan narrowed his eyes and quickly moved in his brain. The energy field interference was almost the same as what he guessed. If the Watcher's ability is supported by technology, the interferer may cause trouble for his rhythm and even fight for himself to fight back. But what does the exposed location mean? He stared at the shadows and tried to dig out more from the dark shadows of that group. What do I believe you? Are these codes again and again a trap? The sound of the shadow was still so cold, and it was a little impatient. Don't choose, Ethan. To use it, wait for the next cycle to die. Ethan gritted his teeth, and his heart felt tight, as if he was being held by something, unable to breathe. But the shadow said it right, he had no way to retreat. Okay, I'll use it. But that's not bad. I saw an image at the competition venue and wrote Failed Product 03 on the cold roll. This has something to do with Aderna, right? I want to hack into their public database and dig out the test records. Can you help me? Shadow hummed lightly, as if he had expected him to ask. Yes, but don't expect to dig it all out. Aderna's firewall is not something you can touch easily. I'll give you a network entrance, and the rest depends on yourself. Ethan clicks the head, and the calculation has begun in the brain. If Failed Product 03 is a certain experimental result, the Watcher may be just one of them. Aderna's purpose may be greater than he thought. He was about to ask again, when a red noise suddenly flashed in the data stream, jumping like a rush, and the atmosphere in the entire space became strange in an instant. Then, distorted human face images appear in the stream, fleeting, like some kind of warning. What is this? Ethan asked in a low voice, his eyes swept around, and a swelling behind him. Shadow didn't answer immediately, his incarnation turned slightly to the source of noise, and his voice was extremely low. Don't be moved, we're intercepted. In a few seconds, an encrypted message floated from the data stream and continued to roll. Ethan quickly slapped the content, and his chest seemed to be squeezing hard, and his breathing stopped for a moment. The message mentioned that the quantum life plan entered the final test stage, and there was another word that was particularly dazzling: core point. He turned to the shadow, eager to speak. What does this mean? The Watcher is just a trial? Or is it all just a part of a larger plan? The shadow's incarnation froze for a moment, and there was a rare heavy feeling in the voice. Don't ask me, I don't know everything. But this message may be more dangerous than anything we have in our hands. Ethan stared at him, his voice low enough to almost roar. You must know what's going on. Don't talk to me again, tell me clearly. Shadow was silent for a few seconds before she said in a low voice, I only know that Aderna never does anything unprofitable. If the Watchmen are their weapons, then you and me may just be the targets they test. The red noise became denser and denser, and suddenly, data rushed towards Ethan's incarnation like a spike. He reacted very quickly, and his fingers plotted on the virtual interface, barely squeezing a temporary barrier, but the barrier was torn into a hole in an instant, and the low noise seemed to pierce into his brain. He lowered his curse and turned to the shadow. We have to leave, now. The sound of the shadow is still cold. Next time to cycle, use a tamper. At the same time, hack into the Aderna network and find any traces related to failed products. Don't waste time, we may not have much chance. Before his consciousness was cut off, Ethan finally glanced at the disintegrating stream, with only one thought in his brain: the answer was in that darkness, waiting for him to dig. At the moment when the consciousness was broken, Ethan's brain seemed to explode, and his eyes were blurred. A few seconds later, he found that he was not awake in the old apartment, but was pulled back to the virtual space deep in the dark network. After only a few minutes of time, the data flow around it was like a liquid metal, shaking uneasily, and the low-frequency sound made people's chests swell, as if they would be crushed by this space at any time. On the code wall, the red light net flickered in dark, emitting a strange burning smell, which made people's nasal cavity burst. "Are you ready?" Shadow's voice came from the side, as cold as ice-clad blade, hidden in a tight snail. His avatar stood in the center of the data stream, his fingers sliding rapidly on the virtual interface, as if he had been ill-touched. Ethan bit his teeth, clicked the head, and knocked his fingers down the command. "Quantum interferer, start." A low buzzing bird came down from the foot, and the data current was instantly distorted, as if it was disturbed by an invisible hand. The light network is more intense, but a small area ahead is clearly weakening, revealing a small crack. "It's done." Adriana's low-level storage server, the entrance is there. The shadow was silent, and the incarnation quickly moved to the crack and his fingers laid out a protective barrier. I stared at the firewall. "You are decoding carefully." "Quick." Ethan said nothing, staring at the flying code in the data stream, his fingers so fast that they could hardly see clearly. His brain was flying. If the Watcher's ability came from Adriana, there must be a trace here. Quantum life plan, the core point. These words shave his nerves like the tip of a knife. He had to dig out something, even if it was just a name or a number, otherwise the 24-hour lonely life would be wasted again. Finish a folder with the tag early iteration. Ethan said in a low voice, his voice feeling a little sandy. Cracking. Before he finished speaking, the data stream suddenly shook violently, the light network exploded like flames, the low noise became harsh, and the whole space seemed to collapse. The side effects of the dryer are worse than expected. Shadow's breath was still cold, but the fingers flew faster on the interface. "The firewall has been counterattacked, hurry!" Ethan gritted his teeth and glanced over the decrypted data. A missing record popped up on the screen, titled Quantum Life Plan Early Iteration. Here we mention a monitor and the movement mode is like a watcher, hidden, extremely fast, and accurate to make people feel cold. There is another sentence that is even more eye-catching. It needs to be reset regularly to maintain stability. His heart beats like a broken bell, causing a slight rhythm. This is no coincidence. Is the Watcher a trial product? Or is there more monsters like him in this plan? Just as I was about to look down, the data suddenly pierced like a spike, and the protective layer around the incarnation was torn apart. The noise pierced into his brain like a scepter. He lowered his curse and almost lost his balance. At this moment, the shadow suddenly moved to him, and with a finger, he used a barrier to attack. But at the moment when the barrier shattered, a small real IP clip leaked from the incarnation of the shadow, flashing through a blurred light. Ethan glanced at this scene and felt a little nervous. Is the shadow helping him? Or else have other plans? He gasped and asked in a low voice, "Why are you taking this risk?" Shadow didn't look at him and replied coldly, "Don't think too much, the mission cannot be failed." His temperament was as hard as an iron plate, but Ethan felt that there was a moment of stopping. He slammed the head and threw this idea away. It was impossible, this guy never showed his bottom. The space was shaking harder and violenter, and the light turned into debris, and harsh warnings were heard around it. Ethan bit his teeth and hit his finger on the interface last. The download is completed, a small part of the encrypted data. There's also a location record marked bailout. In the outskirts of New Asia Trantis, the Agent Zero station. He had no time to think about it, and the data was already coming like a flood. The position is exposed, go! Shadow shouted softly, and the incarnation moved towards the exit first. Ethan followed, his brain seemed to be filled with messy information and could not make up for his head. What is the relationship between the monitor and that record and the Watcher? If this plan involves multiple test subjects, what about himself? The only undead? Or is it just a pawn that can be replaced at any time? Suddenly, a red light rushed in, like a warning left by the watchman. Ethan's heart was filled with a slight gaze with the shadow. But the wavy streak under his feet almost swallowed him up. He kept calm and asked in a low voice, "What the hell are you doing in this game?" Shadow's incarnation was for a moment and replied coldly, "Leave alive like you." As the voice fell, another red light came, and the two of them shook away again. Ethan's heart beat like a drum, his fingers were clenched unconsciously. The consciousness is cut off at the last moment, and the darkness swallows everything. But in the brain, that place, the 0-point station, is like an unsolved password, repeatedly verbal. After a few hours, Ethan finally felt the pressure of the secret network, dragging his tired body back to the apartment. His brain was still in a mess. He sat in the communication room. The room was as small as an iron box. The blue light emitted from the screen pierced the eyes and the low-frequency electronic noise buzzed around his ears, as if something was diamonding in his brain. He rubbed his son's acupoint, but his mind had not completely returned to the skull, but the three words 0-point station were like thorns, which made him unable to calm down for a moment. The fingers slide on the virtual interface and reconnect to the dark network. The incarnation of the shadow appears almost at the other end of the screen at the same time, with nothing in the background and no trace of the cable can be caught. "Don't go." Shadow's voice was still as cold as ice, and it was a little unnatural. 0-point station may be a pit. You haven't seen the speed of Aeterna's firewall counteracting. Go on your own? That's asking for death. Ethan pulled a sneer on his lips, stopped his fingers, staring at the screen with his eyes straight. "What do you know? Don't tell me you have never heard of 0-point station." His voice was low, and it was a fire, and every word he said seemed to be squeezing toothpaste. He was suffering from this half-hidden game, and every time he talked to the shadow, he felt like he was touching in a mist. After a few seconds of calming down, the shadow's language was still stable, with a little more difficult to conceive. "That place is not worth your life. It's a bit wrong. I've seen someone commit it." This blew like a cold wind, making Ethan's eyebrows snake. "What's wrong? This guy never reveals his bottom line. What does this sentence mean today? A sincere warning, or are you playing psychological warfare again? Stop talking to me." Ethan bit his teeth and his voice became harder. "I don't care what others do, I just know that the line of the Watcher may be there. I can't even close my eyes." He put his fingers on the table, as if he was pressing on some kind of uneasiness. "If you don't go, I'll go by myself." The shadow didn't say anything anymore, and the incarnation on the screen stood quietly, as if he had given up a dispute. After a few seconds, the dialogue window closed directly, leaving only black. Ethan leaned back to the back of the chair, breathing a long breath, and his heart was not relaxed. The shadow is always like a lock that cannot be opened. He must know more than he said, but why should he be slandered? Are you afraid that he will dig out something that he shouldn't touch, or have other plans? The night became darker and darker, and I couldn't see anything outside the car window, only a little light was shaking far away. Ethan drove to the outskirts of New Atreides, and on both sides of the deserted road were broken buildings, like gnawed bones. The air is filled with the damp iron smell, and the occasional mechanical noise makes people rush back and forth. Suddenly, the car overturned a piece of gravel and made a harsh sound. He held the steering wheel tightly and his palms were slightly sweating. "My brain can't stop. What is hidden in 0-point station? The Watcher is Aeterna's test product, and this is almost certain. But if that plan involves more people, what is going on with his rebirth? Every time he wakes up, the pain is like a knife carved in his brain, and he can't stand it anymore. If all of this is just another game for them." He murmured in a low voice, his breath as deep as the walls. The darkness outside the car window is like a black hole of data flowing, swallowing every hope. He slammed his head and forced himself to focus. If you can't stop, stopping is equivalent to confirming. Finally, the car parked in front of a clearing of weeds. 0-point station, a practical facility that has been destroyed for many years, is surrounded by broken columns like a forgotten cemetery. Ethan pushed the door of the green glass, and his footsteps were particularly harsh in the silence. The interior of the experiment room was dim and damp, and the air was mixed with the smell of Chen's medicine and burning circuits. The ancient equipment emitted a faint hum, like a dying breath. The sound of water comes from a certain place, one by one, making people feel nervous. He turned on the flashlight, the beam swept over the gray console and scattered data disks. The footsteps stopped in front of an ancient intellectual end, leaving traces of the last operation on the screen. He touched the button lightly, and the screen lighted up, and a missing document popped up. The words are blurry, but a few words pierce the eyes: quantum life plan, ideological fragments, reset. The document mentioned that reset is related to intellectual file, but its specific purpose has been destroyed. Ethan's eyebrows are tightly locked. Reset? Is this related to his circulation? Or has the Watchman experienced a similar process? A beat of heartbeat and my fingers were tightening. If these subjects were once living people, their ideas were divided, stored, or even reorganized. Then every recollection of his mind was also continuing this disgusting cycle. There were countless fragments in his brain, and every time he died and every time he woke up, it was like being touched by an invisible hand. It seems like a code has been deleted in my heart, and I can't find the direction in vain. Looking at the pile of scrapped parts beside the end, he noticed a broken data chip with a blurred number E0. He picked up and looked through it. He didn't know what was famous and stuffed it into his pocket. It may just be garbage, but I just told him that I can't let it go. The air became heavier and heavier, and the sound of the humming birds seemed to be coming from all directions. Ethan stood there, his eyes locked on the screen, his fingers stopped in the air, as if waiting for an answer that never came. Just as Ethan stared at the missing files on the end screen of Zero Point Station, a low mechanical sound came from the depths of the wall, like an old machine suddenly being pulled and started, making a reluctance to growl. The air suddenly became heavy, making people breathless. He turned his head suddenly, his hand light shaking in the dim corridor, and the red warning light suddenly lit up, flickering wildly, and the harsh warning sound was diamonding straight into his brain like a scepter. The burnt smell made the nose sour, and the coldness of metal made the chest blocked. What the hell? He gritted his teeth and lowered his spell, and his feet stepped back without hesitation. The wall is filled with metal scratches, and several hidden doors slip open, revealing the wheels of the automatic anti-shock robot. Their eyes lit up the red light, and the laser network opened instantly, and the detailed red lines formed a dead network in the dark. The sound of the low bird following the swaying rose, like a bloody wild dog approaching step by step. Ethan's heartbeat was so fast that it was about to explode, and his brain was moving at a rapid speed. This is not an accident, the system responds too quickly and is too precise. Someone was controlling him far away and wanted to hold him down. Is it a Watchman? Or a guy hiding deeper? He squatted down, avoided a laser, held his palm against the cold ground, looked around, and found a way to survive. The corridor is as narrow as an iron box with a turning angle in front, but the laser network is rapidly shrinking. I can't stop, I'll be done if I stop. He murmured in a low voice, suddenly turned toward the corner, and his body slid over the wall. A laser light rubbed over the shoulders, and the burnt smell made the stomach swell. The explosion sounded from behind, and the tracking splashed on the ground, and the debris were everywhere, and the flames reflected on the broken metal wall. He glanced at a blurry mark on the wall, shaped like a mark on the E0 chip in his pocket, but he didn't have time to take a look. The pressure of death is like a palm, choking the neck tightly. The brains are in a group. What are they afraid of? Final file? Or is there a bigger secret hidden here? Every step is like catching a life, but I just told him that I cannot retreat. If you retreat, everything will be useless. The corridor is as close as possible, but it is a dead end. The laser network comes from both sides, and the red lines are as dense as spiders, becoming increasingly tighter. Ethan bit his teeth and tried to knock a side door, but the door was as hard as a block of iron. He turned around, his back against the wall, and his chest was undulating violently. The low birds following the swayed closer and closer, and the fire was flashing in front of us. There is no way to go. That's it? He growled and smashed his fist hard on the wall. The next second, the laser hit the chest, and the pain was like current storm throughout the body, and the mind instantly shattered. All I heard was explosions left in my ears, silence like a sneer. When his consciousness started to slap, he suddenly opened his eyes and found that he was lying on the bed in the apartment, with cold sweat soaking his clothes. The pain in the chest was still alive, as if it had been torn open. He sat up, pressed the sun with his fingers tremblingly, and his brain was full of the last screen of 0 Point Station. That feeling of powerlessness is like a poisonous medicine. After a few minutes, he could only breathe smoothly, but his hands were still shaking. Can't drag it anymore. He gritted his teeth and uttered a few words in a low voice. Every time he dies, the other party is even more rude and jealous. The watchman, or the person behind him, is not trying to maintain the cycle, but to completely wipe out his movements. He must fight back while they haven't completely locked his next step. Walking into the communication room, the blue light on the screen made the eyes feel sore, and the low-frequency electronic noise buzzed around the ears. He went to the dark net, tapped his fingers on the virtual interface, and the shadow appeared almost at the same time, and the background on the opposite side was still empty, like a black box that could never be opened. How much do you know? Ethan's voice was low, and every word was filled with flames. The broken system at 0 Point Station almost killed me. How dare you say you have no headaches? The opposite side was quiet for a few seconds, and the shadow's language was as cold as if it was calculating something, but it was a little fluctuating. That place. I've seen too many people not coming back. Do you really want to touch that bottom line? Ethan snorted coldly, his fingers clenched unconsciously. Don't talk to me about these. The information you gave me is so bad every time, which makes me die inexplicably. Is this coincidence again? The shadow is not moving, and the sound is even heavier. If the core system of the 0 Point Station is quantum encryption, your cycle may have bigger loopholes. I warned you, don't go. Warning? Ethan slapped the table and his voice rose. If you really want to help, just tell me everything you know. Otherwise, from now on, I'll come myself. There was silence on the other side again, and the window behind closed directly, leaving only black. Ethan leaned back to the back of the chair, spitting out a long breath, and his heart was under pressure. Shadow, every time, it seems like a plan, hiding the plan after 10 steps. He must know more, but why not? Are you afraid that he will dig out something that he shouldn't touch, or is he a part of the trouble himself? His eyes fell on the corner of the table, and his fingers were rubbing the E0 chip in his pocket. Does the score at 0 Point Station have anything to do with this? If this is a certain tag, or part of the code, he snatched his head and forced himself to calm down. No matter what the shadow thinks, he can no longer be shaken by his nose. Whether it is the watchman or the strength behind them, since they dare to take action, don't blame him for biting back. His fingers stopped beside the wafer, and he suddenly raised his head, his eyes locked on the blank dark window on the screen. Maybe, this time, he can make the entire chessboard turn one. After a few hours, the chill in the early morning scraped into the apartment at the bottom of New Asia Trantis like a knife. The light in the screen in the communication room shook like a damaged lamp, making people's eyes sore. Ethan sat in the broken chair, clutching the E0 chip in his pocket with his fingers, and repeatedly deducing the conversation with Shadow for a few hours ago until he made up his mind. He took a deep breath and clicked on the recording interface. The sound was as low as a stone pressing on his chest. Shadow, this may be the last contact. If you still hide something, say it now, otherwise I will carry it to the end. He paused, his fingers clenched tightly and loosely, as if he wanted to catch something, but was afraid of grabbing nothing. If you are still an ally, don't let me down. The screen was still blank. He turned off the record, encrypted the message and sent it, and then leaned back to the back of the chair. His heartbeat was still very fast, but he knew that there would be no way out after he went out. He wants to spread a false information on the dark network, saying that he has cracked the secret of the E0 chip and is ready to shake out all the secrets of immortal technology. This is a crazy game, using himself as a force to lead the snake out of the hole. Data shows that the Watcher's response speed to the information is as high as 90%, which is the only breakthrough. Before dawn, Ethan had already penetrated the scrap data center at the bottom of New Atrastus. The air was filled with burnt smell, and the broken circuit board was stepped on under the feet, and occasionally there was a harsh sound. The dim light is hard to outline the surroundings, and the electronic noise far away is like a continuous irritation, causing people's skin to feel numb. He squatted down, his fingers quickly connected a dead body that had wiped out the robot, adjusting the signal module to emulate the illusion of human activities. The time left for yourself is no more than half an hour, and the other party may track it to you at any time. Come on, Watchman. This time it's not you who wins me, I'm waiting for you to deliver it to the door. He murmured in a low voice, his lips twitching, as stiff as a short-circuited machine. The palms were already wet, and the brain quickly deduced the other party's reaction. If the Watchman could really play quantum encryption, this ambush might have been seen through from the beginning. But he has no choice but to pay them off because of the information. After setting up the fake target, he entered the old monitoring system in the data center and implanted a circular screen, allowing the intruder to think he was still wandering around the entrance. His fingers danced on the virtual interface, and his sweat slid across the altitude. He raised his head and looked around him from time to time, and his ears captured every abnormal static of every silk. Time is like a skeleton tightening his neck, making people breathless every second. Walking to an old terminal machine, a string of unfinished codes are left on the screen, Aderna_init_protocol_03. He glanced at it, his eyebrows slightly browed, but he immediately slammed the head and continued to move forward. There is no time to be distracted, and the most important thing to be tight now is to lay the trap well. The center of the data is darker, and the air seems to be solidified. Only the sound of one's breath and the occasionally system warning sound, which is as sharp as if it is shaving nerves. Ethan leaned against a broken metal pillar, tapping his fingers to the end, monitoring the response of the signal source. The trap was in place, but the anxiety in my heart became heavier and heavier. Will the other party take the seat? Or have they known for a long time that this is a trap and are waiting to oppose an army? Suddenly, the screen finally flashed, and an unencrypted message jumped out, with only a short line of words: "Be careful, they are faster than you." Ethan's pupils shrank suddenly, his heart beat like an out-of-control impulse signal, making his chest numb. Is it a shadow? Or another trap? His fingers were on the end, he hesitated for half a second, and his brain was deduced quickly. If this is a warning from the shadow, the other party may have approached. If this is a misguided by the Watcher, his plan to change is only more difficult now. Without thinking too much, there was a slight sound of footsteps everywhere, and the rhythm was unstable, as if trying to explore a trap, and then a slight electronic interference sound came up, as if someone was breaking his signal barrier. You should die, why are they so fast? Ethan gritted his teeth, lowered his spell, and broke out in cold sweat. He quickly switched to the monitoring screen and found that the signal was disturbed and the snowflakes were shattered, and he couldn't see the location of the visitor clearly. He forced himself to be calm and deduce a solution in his brain. If the other party can find this quickly, the information leaked faster than expected, and the shadow has not stood by him from the beginning. The sound of his footsteps rose again, and it became closer, accompanied by the slight movement of the metal scratching the ground, as if he was deliberately torturing his nerves. The warning sound suddenly screamed, making the skin numb. Ethan held the end of the stool, and his fingertips were almost embedded in the outer shell. He knew that the trap might have been touched, but the other party's actions were too precise, as if he had expected everything. The fingers operated quickly on the end, and he tried to reversely lock the other party's signal source. As long as you can catch a thread, even if it is just a code clip, you may be able to turn it around. The footsteps were so close that I could almost hear the other person's breathing. Ethan was leaning against the metal pillar, his palms were slippery, and there was only one thought in his heart: No matter who you are, I will at least tear off a piece of you this time. Just as his footsteps approached, almost as he could hear the other person's breathing, Ethan suddenly held his breath and stuck a metal pillar on his back. The cold touch pierced into his skin like a pinch, making his whole body tight. The darkness deep in the center of the data cannot be dissolved, and only the rapid lights far away flashed continuously, and the shadow twisted and stretched between the broken server's skeleton. The air was filled with a damp smell of oil, like rotten memories circling in the nasal cavity. Suddenly, a sharp blast teared the silence, and the fake target of the robot he set up was touched, and the electromagnetic force swept through the entire space like a wave, and the low-frequency buzzing made his skin numb. "It's now!" Ethan bit his teeth and pulled out from the hidden points, stomping the circuit slap on the ground, causing a harsh and crispy look. In the darkness, the watchman's figure froze short and frozen due to interference, and the red light flashed in the head. He didn't have time to think about it, his heartbeat made his chest hurt like a drum, and he held the electric rod hidden in his sleeve and suddenly rushed out. The spark exploded in the darkness and hit the other side hard, but the watcher reacted quickly and left the corner. On one side of his body, the electric rod only wiped his shoulders and brought out a dazzling string of light. "No, but it's too slow." The watcher's voice was low, carrying a mechanical hollow, as if it was coming down from an ice layer. He punched Ethan's chest with a backhand, making him stumble back, his throat feeling even sweet. "Shut!" Ethan snorted, reluctantly calming his body, and his brain moved quickly. The other party's actions were too precise, as if he had already considered every step he took. The residual wave of the electromagnetic circuit is still there, and the signal barrier has not been completely restored, which is his only window. He gritted his teeth and rushed forward, holding the watchman's arm tightly with both hands, trying to change the situation. The two of them were scattered in the dark, and the metal ground was trampled out of scratched sharp birds, and the broken parts were quadruple. "Your face." Taking advantage of the approaching, Ethan punched the watchman in the head. The crisp sound of shattering began, and a thread broke open on the other side's mask, revealing half of the face. The scar was slanted from the corner of his eyes to the lower corner, so familiar that his heart suddenly shrank. This scar is exactly the same as his. He was stunned for a moment, the force on his hands was unconscious and his brain became a group. Is this a coincidence? Or, the side effects of some gene copying? Or do they share a certain past? He tried to deduce various possibilities, but every guess was like deep and clear, making him dare not think further. The watchman snorted coldly, took advantage of the opportunity to snatch him, and threw him heavily to the ground with a backhand. The pain ran through the whole body like current. Ethan bit his teeth and tightened his teeth and reluctantly stood up. His video swept over the weapon slap on the ground, with a line of small words engraved on it, Aderna_init_protocol_03. It's exactly the same as the code on the terminal. His pupils shrink and a chill surges in his heart. Immortal technology, what is this guy? Another practical product? Or something worse? This scar, who are you? Ethan growled, his voice filled with shock and confusion. He tried to stand up, but the watcher was approaching, his eyes were so cold that there was no emotion. The other party did not answer, but just had a slight sigh, as if recalculating an equation. In the darkness, Ethan glanced at a miniature hanging wall hanging around the other party's neck, with a vague symbol engraved on the surface, like some kind of ancient figure, which was incompatible with this cold technological world. But he didn't have time to look at it, and the watcher's attack came again, and the cold arc was plotted over, like a knife shot out by the god of death, pointing straight to his life. He reluctantly hit himself, but his arm was still bruised. The pain made him breathless, his mind was like a broken signal, and he kept flashing. Every strike by the watcher was as if he had been measured accurately, hitting the key point, and Ethan was pressed to no avail. But the brain was still holding on to the point where I just realized that this scar, if this code could be squeezed out for a while, maybe more could be dug out. He tried his best to take it out of his pocket and trembled his fingers to the watcher's equipment. With a light sound, the data flow was successfully extracted, but the price was a pain in the chest, as if he wanted to tear him into two and a half. He fell to the ground, his eyes getting darker and darker, his fingers still holding the end. While breathing, he pressed the recording key, and the sound was so weak that it would stop at any time. "Shadow, you always hide a half sentence, but I can't believe even half of it now." I saw his face. "It has something to do with me. If you know anything, don't be silent." After the voice was sent, his hands drooped without any effort, and finally the green light of the message on the screen flashed through, and then fell into a dead silence. The darkness seemed to swallow everything, leaving only the lights far away swaying, like the last slam. The watchman stood up and looked at him with a low head. There was no fluctuation in his eyes, but he turned away coldly, and his footsteps gradually disappeared deep in the center of the data. The watchman's footsteps had long disappeared deep in the center of the data, and the darkness was so stressful that people could not breathe. Ethan was lying on the cold metal ground, and the pain in his chest seemed to be moving with a knife. "The consciousness continues and you will faint at any time." I don't know how long it took, but the pain was a little slow. He bit his teeth tightly, tremblingly lifted up, pressed his palm on his chest, and he barely recovered a little bit of awakening. The emergency light flashed far away, and the dim light outlined the broken wheels around. The servo was scattered all over the ground. The pungent smell of a certain chemical drug was permeated in the air, mixed with the low noise emitted by the old terminal machine, which was as regular and suppressed as a heartbeat. Ethan sat upright against a pile of broken racks, and took out his fingers with trembling fingers. The faint light of the screen reflected his bloody face. He gasped, clicked the stream of data extracted from the watcher equipment, unzipped the encryption layer in one layer, and each line of code was like a spike, piercing into his brain. "Quantum Life Laboratory, Scope Agreement." His voice was low, and his throat seemed to be ground by sandpaper. "The text on the screen is cold and heartless. He and the Watcher are both experimental products of immortal technology, and their ideas and genes are designed to be in opposition and symbiosis to test the stability of human beings under extreme conflicts. What's even more terrifying is that this is just a starting point. They want to create a collective consciousness that can be infinitely divided and integrated, and control the entire new Atreides' Sinway network. This data is impossible," he said in a low voice, his eyebrows tightly locked. "How can quantum plugs be stable to this level? Unless they have already mastered some unknown variable." His brain flew rapidly and tried to disassemble all of this with scientific logic. If the consciousness can be manipulated, is his memory complete? Is there a hidden parameter that makes him think he is free? The more I think about it, the colder I feel, the more I feel like the deleted data, leaving only a blank error code. He held the end involuntarily, and the edges hurt so hard that his palms hurt. I'm a human, or are they writing a string of codes? This question is like a virus, repeatedly storing his will. At this moment, a slight noise came from deep in the center of the data, like a metal friction sound, short and sharp. Ethan raised his head suddenly, his eyes swept towards the darkness, and his hand holding the end tightened slightly. Is the Watcher back? Or something else? He held his breath and listened quietly for a few seconds, only a low frequency of buzzing birds roaring around his ears. Maybe it was just a mistake, but this short interference made his heart beat faster and his consciousness slightly pulled back to reality. At the end, a light sound suddenly came out, and a voice message jumped out. Ethan was stunned for a moment, and hesitated for a moment, and then clicked on the playback. The sound of the shadow comes from the middle, low and vague, with the meaning of experimentation. Ethan, I've participated in the early stages of the symbol agreement, but there are some things you may not want to know. The connection between you and the Watcher is far from the enemy. The voice ended abruptly, leaving only the electronic sludges rumbling in the air. His pupils suddenly contracted, and his hand holding the end shook slightly. Not only the enemy? What does this mean? Do they share a certain past, or is he simply a backup for the Watcher? The scar in his brain was exactly the same as the Watcher, which made a chill in his heart. He tried to analyze the language of the shadow, and did he really reveal it, or did he calculate it again? But no matter how you think about it, you can't find the answer. You knew it a long time ago, right? he said in a low voice. His breath was full of fatigue, but no one heard this, only the buzzing sound around him responded. The video swept over and fell to the ground, with a tiny symbol engraved on it, which was somewhat similar to the mark on the watcher's skull. He narrowed his eyes, trying to see more clearly, but his body's weakness made his vision blurry. That symbol. Did I miss something? He murmured in a low voice. His fingers slid over the ground without any effort, trying to get up and get closer, but only changed to a pain. The cold eyes of the watchman flashed in the sea of brain, and the half-exposed face looked like a mirror, reflecting what he didn't want to face the least. If they are the opposite side of being designed, is resistance still meaningful? If the memory is implanted, is his puncture another experimental variable? He tried to put the watchman into the perspective of the watchman. If the other party knew the truth, then was his coldness another way to deal with it? Or is it that the other party has accepted this game long ago? If Shadow says it's true. He lowered his voice and slid his fingers over the end screen, as if looking for the last undecrypted code. In the darkness, there was only a low-frequency buzzing sound, as if mocking his piercing. The idea became more and more blurred, and the pain was like a damaged signal, repeatedly interfering with thoughts, but the doubts in my heart were like knives, becoming deeper and deeper. After a while, the pain in his chest was slightly relieved. Ethan bit his teeth and held up with a bunch of broken racks, sitting up straight, and his mind was reluctant to pull back to reality. At the end, the screen flashed in the darkness, and the dazzling light made him squint his eyes. His fingers trembled and he almost had no energy to touch. A new automatic message jumped out, like a forceful blow from the core system of immortal technology. The air suddenly became even heavier, and the low buzzing sound around seemed to be swallowed by something, leaving only his heavy breathing in the center of the scrap data. Life reconstruction system, the final choice to start. The cold mechanical sound was sent from the end, and each word was like a spike, piercing into his brain. Option 1, turn off the system, end the death cycle, and the price is permanently deleted for consciousness. Option 2, keep the cycle and continue to execute the experiment parameters. The voice only, and then replenished, choose countdown time, 3 minutes. Ethan was stunned, his fingers slid above the screen, and the cold sweat in his palm almost slipped off. Turning off the system means that everything is done and you don't come back again, and everything you self may disappear in no time. But continue to circulate, he is just a block of data that is being accidentally sucked, played by immortal technology and those guys hiding in the dark. His brain is in a group. Is this message true? Or another test? The chill in his heart could not be shaken off no matter how he thought of his first death. The pain of his mind being torn apart, his body was like a damaged equipment, completely out of control. He doesn't want to come again. 3 minutes. He muttered in a low voice, his voice as if it had been worn by sandpaper. The emergency light flashed and threw cold shadows, and the scattered servo bones around it emitted the pungent smell of chemical drugs, as if reminding him that this broken place was never a shelter. He leaned against the rack and swept over a collapsed panel next to him. The symbols on it were still hard to see clearly, but he was no longer able to control it. Finally, the end suddenly responded again, and a voice link requested to jump out. Ethan's eyebrows, his fingers hesitated for a moment, but it still opened. The sound of the shadow comes from the middle, and it continues, scattered with static noise, as if it is hardwired from a very far place. Ethan, have you seen the message? Don't urge, turning off the system is not a way out. When you are finished, the watcher will collapse, it is not what you want. The voice was cold, but there was a hurricane that was difficult to detect. Ethan smirked bitterly at the corner of his mouth, his fingers clenched their ends. Watcher? His voice was exhausted and hard. I have never lived up to whom I have planned. I just want to figure out what I am. He paused, his eyes locked on the countdown on the screen. You have known all this a long time ago, right? But you have never given me a word. The shadow was silent for a few seconds, and only the silence of noise was sizzling. Finally, the other party whispered, you can't afford to bear some truth. Choosing is your business. The voice was as cold as ice, without any fluctuations. Can't bear it? Ethan snorted coldly, full of self-deprecating. I don't know whether I am true or not. What else can I afford? I've been forced to execute the wrong command code. He took a deep breath, his eyes like a locked data, without any movement. This is my own business, it has nothing to do with you. The quiet noise from the other end of the communication suddenly increased, and the sound of the shadow was swallowed, as if it was pinched by some force. At this moment, a string of codes flashed out at the end of the screen, and the numbers jumped to the last 10 seconds as if they were interfered. Ethan's pupils shrank, and his heartbeat was so fast that it was about to explode. Time is not enough, I don't have time to think about it anymore. He tried to guess if he was a designer of immortal technology, would he stay in a back door, and let it be just another scheming? But the brain is blank and there is no answer. No matter whether it is true or not, come on. He murmured in a low voice, and pointed his finger at the option of close system. The screen flashes through a string of codes and finally freezes in a red symbol, which goes dark immediately. At the same time, a deep thorn in the center of the data was transmitted, and the low noise slowly turned into a strange dead silence. The surrounding structure began to collapse, and the sound of metal friction was sharp and short, as if declaring something irreversible. Ethan did not move with the machine, but just listened quietly to those sounds, his breathing slower and slower, and the pain in his chest seemed to be getting farther away. The moment he passed the first death in his brain, the tearing feeling. If this was the last time, it would be worth it. Before the last light finally faded, a line of scattered data flashed over backup idea mechanical unit, unknown location, accompanied by a slight electronic slurred sound. It was immediately covered by the collapsed geese. His visual line was gradually blurred, and the darkness was like a broken signal, swallowing nothing. The skeletons in the center of data fell quietly in silence, leaving only the empty space, quietly covering it.